And greetings on this Thursday, the 13th of July today. Ooh, good thing it only made it on Thursday, huh? Looks like we're jumping around all the mountains in Israel here for a few days. We have already been to Mount Arbel, Mount Carmel. Today we're headed for Mount Hermon, Hermon, I guess is the way we'd say it. And then looks like 3 days on the Mount of Olives. Looking forward to that. Mount Hermon is where we're at today. Referenced is Matthew chapter 17, verses 1 through 9. Verse 5 is quoted, "This is my son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." Drive north on any road in Israel, and Mount Hermon will slowly rise until it fills the windshield. But for the best view of this limestone behemoth, I like Har Bental in the Golan Heights. From here, I can consider the role the mountain played in Jesus' transfiguration. When telling that story, Matthew doesn't use the proper name for this rising terrain, but calls it a high mountain. That's in the first verse of Matthew 17. If you know the landscape, that's enough. Mount Hermon is 9,232 feet in elevation, 2.3 times higher than its nearest competitor. It's impossible to miss this sprawling, snow-laden ridge that dominates Israel's northern horizon. Why does Jesus take the disciples onto its flanks in our story? First, it was nearby. Jesus and the disciples were in the region of Caesarea Philippi near the base of Mount Hermon. And that's quoted in the previous chapter of Matthew 16:13. But second, and most importantly, Jesus used Mount Hermon as his father had used Mount Sinai at the time of Moses. The high mountain setting signals that the Lord is about to say something particularly important. In the case of Mount Sinai, it was the giving of the law. In the case of Mount Hermon, it was marking the divinity of Jesus through the transfiguration. Peter got the connection between these two moments in history. In the book of 2 Peter, he describes Mount Hermon with the same language used to describe Mount Sinai and Mount Zion, calling it the sacred mountain. And he references chapter 1, verse 18 of 2 Peter, and then asks us to compare it to Exodus 19:23, Psalm 2:6, and Jeremiah 31:23. Now that the story's setting has our attention, it's time to consider the purpose of the transfiguration itself. It addressed a support problem. Jesus had recently revealed unthinkable details about his imminent trip to Jerusalem. There he would suffer and die before rising from the dead, Matthew 16:21. The disciples found it easy to nod in approval when Jesus spoke of easy things, but this wasn't one of those moments. The words were barely out of Jesus' mouth when Peter rebuked him. "Never, Lord," he said. "This shall never happen to you," Matthew 16:22. What happened next dismantled those objections. On the mountain, Jesus' appearance changed to reveal his divine glory. Moses and Elijah appeared and began talking approvingly about the trip to Jerusalem. That's in verse 3 of Matthew 17, as well as over in Luke 9:31. And then the ultimate affirmation came directly from the Father. "This is my son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." Matthew 17:5. Many of the things Jesus says to us are pleasant and easy to hear. But when he speaks about things that are less pleasant and harder to accept, he calls us back to the high ground of Mount Hermon to solidify our trust. Jesus is God's Son, the one worthy of our attention, whether he's speaking of easy things or hard. As I read this, I thought about thoughts I was having Wednesday afternoon, from a posting from another believer on Facebook that portrayed Jesus' desire as nothing but basically making us happy and feel good and feel secure and protected, and all the pleasantries we like to think of, but never once in saying what Jesus wanted for us or wanted to give to us was a call like to take up your cross and follow me. That we need to die to self if we're going to live for him. And so for me, this devotion we're doing this morning aims at that. Yes, it's great. It's great when Jesus blesses us. Yes, it's great when Jesus saves us from things and protects us from other things. When we have that peace that he gives within us. Yes, it's great. But he doesn't promise that that's the way it'll be every day. There will be enemies to face. There will be temptations to deal with. There will be sacrifices that have to be made. And all of that is wrapped up in Jesus on that mountain on that day. He told his disciples just recently, I'm headed for Jerusalem, and here's what's going to happen to me when I get there. They didn't like that. So it seems as though God has to assure these three leaders of the disciples, hey, this is my son. Listen to him. He's got my stamp of approval. We need to live like that in our faith. That we're ready. We're ready for the great days. We're ready for the difficult ones. Because Jesus has already told us that's what he's calling us into. It's why he says we don't need to worry. We don't need to fear. Why? Because he's with us in and through that difficulty and that sacrifice, which is often hard for our fleshly nature. But it's the way we follow him. It's the way we receive all that he's got for us. 2 questions. Make a list of the hard things Jesus has asked you to believe. Make a list of the hard things that Jesus has asked you to believe. Which of them is the most difficult for you? Spend some time thinking about that. Let me read it again. Make a list of the hard things Jesus has asked you to believe. Which of them is the most difficult for you? Question 2, what role does Jesus' transfiguration play in how you listen to Jesus? The transfiguration reveals to us that Jesus is not just a human flesh and blood rabbi who teaches wonderful and great things. He is indeed the Son of God. And that needs to make the difference in how we live our lives. The prayer for today, Lord Jesus, I confess that there are times when I resist the things you say. Please break down my stubborn defiance. Use your transfiguration to remind me that there's nothing ordinary about you, and lead me to accept all you teach without objection. Don't pull the Peter. Oh Lord, no, no, no. We're not doing that. Because Peter gets told that, well, he gets called Satan. Jesus says, "Get behind me, Satan." And how does he define that? Your mind is on the things of men. You're thinking like men think. Mere humans without any spiritual insight that's available to you that you have right now. Don't do that. Just say, "Yes, Lord. Yes, Lord." How can you call me Lord, Jesus would ask, and not do what I say? It is a joy to walk with Jesus, but just like any other venture, we got to know that hard days come as well, and he's there for us. Blessings to you today.